Chances are, if you've been in my comments section, you've probably seen a few of these. I'm Geoh, and by popular demand, we're making Donald and Douglas. So the wooden versions of Donald and Douglas were originally released in 1993, and despite some slight changes and updates, were virtually unchanged for the almost 18 years they were available for. And I can kind of see why. In a similar case to Duck, they're really basic designs. Not bad by any means, just very simple. And they work. You can tell who they are by their unique designs and convenient nameplates. As you can expect though, the lack of detail does leave something to be desired. So let's fix them. We're not going to be messing with these ones though, so enter our two victims, two Douglases and two knockoff Donald Tenders. If you didn't notice, wooden Donald and Douglas are basically identical sans their printing, so the two Douglases fit the bill here. To add to that, these are actually factory rejects too, as they have the incorrect chassis, specifically using one meant for a Busy Bee James. This is accented by layers of rust, probably from rotting away in a damp factory in China. And the knockoff Tenders are, knockoffs. So without further ado, let's take these Busy Bee Donglases and begin this makeover. I can already envision the comment section blowing up with,
"How could you use a factory error?"
and,
"I want it, please give it to me."
but trust me, with the level of rust these had, you wouldn't want these. Speaking of, the rust deposit from the axles actually made taking the wheels off these more painful than usual. But once gone, everything came apart smooth as butter. One thing I didn't consider was that because I was making two twin models, I'd have to do everything twice, and on top of that, make them almost identical. Something I can't say I've done before as far as modeling goes. Once the Donglases were disassembled, my attention was directed to removing the domes from the boiler, which was genuinely difficult. After failing with pliers, I just eventually resorted to cutting them off with a blade and smoothing over the stumps with my belt sander. A design issue I wanted to rectify was adding some height to their boilers. To achieve this, I used some board which was around 3mm in height. Once two pieces were cut to size, they were glued onto the boilers. Something I knew I wanted to do with this model was use my Elegoo Max 3D printer to make some additional parts I knew I couldn't make on my own, starting with the funnels. Donald and Douglas have more unique funnel designs compared to the other engines, specifically the second rim they have, and I wanted to make sure I did them justice. I modeled them in Tinkercad and sent the files to the printer. Also not as exciting, but I modeled and printed a new dome as well. With the parts printed, I started drilling holes in the boiler to accommodate them. I started with my handheld Dremel to mark the spots and later moved to my full-size drill. As you can assume from my previous videos, drilling holes is my least favorite part of modeling. It either goes really good or horribly wrong. It went relatively well on the first boiler, but on the second, the larger drill bit ended up grinding a sizable chunk off the front, which might be a clear indicator on why these didn't have funnels in the first place. After that disaster, the Tenders rolled into my line of vision and I began disassembling them. I was pretty much happy with them, and besides some slight modifications that I'll get into shortly, wanted to keep them slightly as is, with the exception of using a 6-wheeled chassis as opposed to the 4-wheeled one present. One thing though I knew I wanted to do was reduce the size of the coal load. This was done by cutting it in my miter box and taking a sizable chunk out the middle. With the coal cut, it was milliput time. The first course of action was filling various gaps on the models, including where the funnel and dome went, the extended boiler base, and any other imperfections, including that chipped area in the front, which was seamless after this. It was tricky manipulating the milliput to fill certain areas, but was definitely worth the time it took. I then took the remainder of the clay to fuse the cut down coal pieces together and blend them as one. When it all dried, I took my Dremel and grinded down any imperfections. Between all that, I modeled and then printed a new cab piece, which was made to work in cohesion with the original running board. I'll be the first to admit it was certainly too tall, but this was actually the second draft, of which the original was even worse height-wise, so I decided to just go with it. I also modeled and printed a new chassis block, specifically to accommodate the unique wheel arrangement Donald and Douglas and also Duck have. After some light sanding, everything was brought outside for a coat of filler primer. While the filler did its thing, I decided to further modify the tenders, adding a deeper curve to them. I started by cutting off the front and then heavily sanding them until rounded and smooth. Using craft wood, new fronts were added, and after applying some wood fillers to the gaps, they were perfect. Before bringing them out for a filler prime, I used 2 round 1x1 tiles from a LEGO Dots picture frame set to represent water caps on the tender. And fun fact, Donald's water cap in the show was actually a repainted pence coin. Now that's clever DIY work. All the main shaping of the pieces were done, so I decided to begin plotting where I wanted my decals to go. And once that was decided, it was time to make them. I love Donald and Douglas's liveries so much, so it was a joy to replicate them. The white and red on black is so striking and unique. Everything was designed in Paint 3D, and it turned out better than expected. With the decals finished, it was time to paint. Because of the handrails chiseled into the boilers, I started by spraying them into Mia TS83 metallic silver. The faces and running boards were sprayed with a grey primer, and those same running boards, along with some cut coffee stir sticks that would become the tender's buffer beams, were sprayed in TS83 Italian red. On a sad note, this year Health Canada actually banned Tamiya spray paints in Canada due to health risks, so make sure when you use it you do it outside and with a mask on. And also make sure you smack that subscribe button. Shameless promotion and safety warning aside, I sprayed 2 Thomas chassis with filler primer which would be used for the tenders. And then it was time to hand paint, which was really smooth as everything was done with a matte black acrylic. So funny thing, for the longest time I actually never had a wooden Donald, just a wooden Douglas and a take-along Donald. In all honesty though, I actually liked the take-along one a lot more because of how much more it looked like the character, and how the red running board just made him pop compared to the all-black wooden toy. Something I'm hoping to achieve here. Did anyone else out there have a mismatched set of the twins too, or even just one? Leave a comment down below if you did. On that note, I only ever had a wooden Ben, no bill to go along. Also, I'll let y'all know I have my P.O. box open at the moment, so if you want to send something along, check out the address in the description. Out of all the pieces, the boiler ended up being the most intimidating thing to paint as I had to go around the handrails. Luckily, they made it out unscathed with some additional gold dots added to represent the whistle. And then it was time for adding the decals and putting all the pieces together. I could not tell you how satisfying it was to see all these pieces come together and see what I imagined in my head for months finally being physically represented in my hands. Now, before I get ahead of myself and call this model complete, there's one last thing to tackle: their faces. As you probably noticed at the beginning, both Donald and Douglas share the same face mold, something I knew I needed to change on mine. I decided to modify one of the faces to have a larger grin, specifically based on this promotional photo, and the other as is. So I grabbed one of the faces and my Dremel and began grinding away. After enough cutting, I was left with this. So I grabbed some paint and immediately tried to fill the space and then got this.
Oh, Jesus! Oh, God! Oh, Jesus! God! Oh, Mary!
So yeah, just a little bit rough. But I powered through. The faces were primed as you saw before and then painted with a grey acrylic. I did multiple thin coats in order to achieve a smooth surface, and once it was dried, I went in with a fine brush to paint the eyes and correcting any overspills with grey. You have to have a real eye for this type of work. My finest hour came when attempting to paint the mouths, starting with the unmodified face I plan to use for Donald. I dry brushed some black inside it, which after some cleanup turned out pretty good. The pupils, which I assumed would be the easy part, became the issue. Then came Douglas, which was a lot smoother than I expected. Starting with a grin and then moving to the eyes and cleaning up the edges on both. And I was in love with how he turned out. It was definitely worth the risk of modifying the face. And his pupils came on a lot cleaner than Donald's. Finally were the eyebrows on both, which were done with the edge of a paperclip and cleaned up once again with the grey paint.
Now, who's behind this?
Eventually, I then moved to adding the silver rim on the wheels, and after a clear coat of Krylon gloss on everything, we're done. And I think we're ready for a reveal. So after all those requests, finally, here's Donald and Douglas. I'll be 100% honest, I'm not super satisfied with how they turned out, as there are some things I'd like to change and modify, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't proud that I was able to pull these off, especially their faces, which I'd say is a clear victory here. But if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you'd enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and liking the video as it really helps me out. And if you want to go one step further, check out my Instagram and Linktree. I want to give a special shout out though to user /crazyfox for being my first supporter on Ko-Fi. I genuinely appreciate the support. And if you want to support me also, check out the link below. But to end off, I've been Geoh, thanks for watching, have some Scottish pride, and I'll see you next time.